I'm starving. Let's get something to eat.
We're reviewing a movie. Okay, not reviewing, discussing, analyzing. We're gonna be taking a look at Green Lantern Beware My Power. And we're gonna look at everything, so it's more like Green Lantern Beware My Spoilers, because there will be a lot of them. It was very fascinating watching this film, forming opinions on it, then going and researching on it and seeing what the creators were aiming for, and then juxtaposing that with the film I just watched. Because this is a case where the creator's intent very much is clear inside the film, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. So we're gonna be taking a look at time of recording the most recently released DC animated Green Lantern film, Green Lantern Beware My Power. One thing that's notable about it is that it features John Stewart at the center, allegedly as the central character. We'll get to that in a minute. He is, but he isn't. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics Green Lantern time. Green Lantern Beware My Power. It was mass released on July 26, 2022. It was written by John Semper and Ernie Altbacker, who had worked together previously. You may recognize their names from Spider-Man the Animated Series, and they've done a lot more, tons of animated pedigree. The film was directed by Jeff Wamister, who on the DC animated film side had previously directed Justice Society World War II. Now this movie, for those who were aware of it, because I did post a poll asking if people had seen it, admittedly was a bit early, but the dominant response still was, what is it? Well, this film, for those who knew of it and now have seen it, has elicited a variety of responses, from it's awful, a character assassination, this because of a plot twist later on that we will get to, or it's a masterpiece, an ode to John Stewart. And of course, there are more ambivalent responses. I'm here to put forward the thesis that is aggressively mediocre, but that it has potential even within the framework presented. With just a few tweaks could become a lot stronger. I'm going to tweak it at the end. Sounds wrong. Where this movie falls down most is in its dedication to the themes that it wants to bring out, because they are very specific. It's actually trying to emulate another film. Because of this, there are moments that match up with the theme that the writers and creators are trying to put forward, but not necessarily with the events that occur within the movie. Nor is everything conveyed smoothly, so some things don't feel like character evolution, and more like characters start one place and then end another. As a result, there can be a lack of emotional connection at points for certain characters, or all of them as well. Miles will vary. It also relies heavily on past character knowledge, be it of comics or say some form of animated verse, because it does draw some imagery and some concepts from them, particularly hard-traveling heroes, though not really, even though it says it does. Emerald's Twilight and Dawn, those aforementioned from the comic book side, and the DCAU, that's the DC Animated Universe. Now, for those of you who've been here for a while, you may be aware that I think hard-traveling heroes has aged like milk. It's curled on the floor. But I did not let that sway me. For despite quotes to the contrary, there isn't much hard-traveling heroes about this. It does attempt some socially relevant commentary, but not too much, and actually some of what it does attempt is tweaked. It was tweaked behind the scenes. It's nowhere near as relentless as hard-traveling heroes. Where it pulls the most from hard-traveling heroes is in the fact that Green Arrow is a central character. In this film, he functions as comic relief. He needs to bring up the mood. It's very required, because this film can get a little dour. But it happens so much, I dubbed him Sir Quips-a-lot.
Terrible on like all fronts.
Now this film is essentially a war movie, and not just any war movie, it has some lofty ambitions. This film seeks to be John Stewart's Apocalypse Now. Altbacker stated, "We wanted him to kind of start from a nadir point, and we wanted it to have Heart of Darkness / Apocalypse Now in the storytelling, where we're going on this mission." Where this gets really interesting is in Semper's assertions as to what the core themes of Apocalypse Now are. Or theme. He stated, I got so many quotes today, it's great. "The whole theme behind Apocalypse Now is that in order to escape the jungle, you have to go back into it. When Apocalypse Now begins, he's out and not in battle at that particular moment, but he's sort of out of it. He knows he has to get back into it in order to escape the trauma. It's very much the story of one man finding peace with himself and understanding how he can continue to live the rest of his life. That really is the core of the story." Now, Miles is very much going to vary on whether or not you agree or disagree with this assessment. Personally, I hard disagree. This is an interesting reading, but one that takes the concepts of Apocalypse Now and reduces them down to an individualistic concept, and also places it within a narrative of triumph, which is not really what occurs. For Apocalypse Now, which is an incredible adaptation of Heart of Darkness, its main theme is about the descent into darkness and madness of the human soul, using the lens of colonialism in the former and war in the latter. It's an examination of a larger concept framed through the eyes of one, but it's really meant to be a larger meditation on the human existence. The journey up the river through the jungle and its shrouding of alienness to the protagonist represents the descent into the very depths of the human soul in terms of capacity for depravity and cruelty. It's a meditation on the concept and soul of humanity, and whether or not the civility one cloaks himself with is just a mask for the beast within. The focus is far more spiritual and not so much targeted on the protagonists themselves. And even if it were, that protagonist does not come out of the story better for wear. Semper's discussion frames it as a story of triumph, one man going to conquer his demons. But it's the tale of journeying into, well, the heart of darkness, and finding someone who has fully embraced it, and leaving with the dark realization that the separation is not that stark. It's a sad tale, and at the end of it, one is left questioning a lot of things. Yes, the protagonist survived, but I wouldn't exactly herald it as a story about conquering trauma. Now, whether or not one agrees with Semper's assessment, mine, somebody else's, there have been tons of essays and examinations of Apocalypse Now. These themes of Apocalypse Now and how the creators view them are going to largely impact Beware My Power. Not only in terms of the themes of PTSD and trauma recovery, but also in terms of the story's very structure itself. It will try and mirror that journey up the river with the events that happen in this film. Structurally, it is going to model itself off of Apocalypse Now. And Beware My Power never achieves the same level of depth as Apocalypse Now. Now, in terms of working through the themes of trauma, John does clearly start this off with PTSD. This from his wartime activities, and it flares up once explicitly while he's fighting Hawkgirl, and you can imply it again later on in another fight. But in terms of an arc wherein the things he sees during the film lead to his change of heart, which in this manifests as no longer seeking to use lethal force against his enemies, which he was willing to at the film's start, that just happens. There's not really a catharsis moment or a connection that one can draw through the events that John has seen and him changing his mind. He simply starts one way and ends another.
I finally remembered why I fight and why, whatever price I have to pay, I'm okay with it.
John in this is presented as a bit boilerplate. He's a bit of a template for a traumatized soldier. They don't bring in some of the unique John things to his character, like him being an architect or him refusing a secret identity or some of just the cool John moments. But before we can start analyzing too much, you need to know, what is this movie about? What is happening? Firstly, we must note that Beware My Power is a callback to John Stewart's first appearance in the comics. That was the little tagline when he first appeared, Beware My Power. So it is a nice little callback. There are moments like that throughout. There's clearly a love of Green Lantern lore and John Stewart and some other moments in this, but they don't all pay off, but they are there. At the start of this movie, we're introduced to John Stewart, who is having a wartime flashback, and he ends up getting into a fight with some violent ne'er-do-wells picking on a homeless man in an alley. He steps in because he has to do something, and this is meant to signify that he can't abide by injustice. This is one of the stronger scenes in the film because it sets up some information about John. It doesn't tell you, it shows you, and it works. This fight that they show is brutal. The homeless man gets doused with gasoline, there's someone who smashes a ball to glass John. It's very intense. This is not exactly an all ages outing. I mean, you know your kids, but this may not be the outing to introduce some of the younger ones to John Stewart. Certainly will not be for me. Of course, that's going to matter to some and not to others, and again, of course, mileage varies. John is arrested but is let go when the police see that he is a veteran. John is stoic, barely speaking.
This guy's a Medal of Honor winner. Citation list a mile long. Do we really want to risk getting heat from social media or the press?
John doesn't speak for a lot of this film, and this is a deliberate choice. When he does speak, there's very little emoting, because lots of times he's just stating facts or observing. Now, this is not the fault of the voice actor Aldous Hodge, who does inject some flair when the occasion calls for it. The end line reading of his oath, excellent. However, on the whole, the script doesn't allow for moments like this, and John is presented as fairly flat. This is meant to be for a few reasons. One, he has to be the straight man to Ollie throughout the large part of this journey, and also he's meant to have all this trauma that he's working through silently, stoically. He's also meant to be a more quiet observer who puts some things together, but as a result, he can be a bit hard to connect with. There are moments where it's easy to forget that he's even there, though of course some may form a connection because of the PTSD plot, or also because of prior connections from other mediums or other works. Upon returning home, John is greeted with part of Hal and Kyle's origin. Visually, it's very Hal. The crashed ship landing, him running and finding an injured alien. Event-wise, it's much more Kyle Rayner, particularly because the Guardian who gives him the ring, which happens to be Hal Jordan's ring, is Ganthet. Now, origin changes occur all the time. Sometimes they're for the better. The question is always, does it work for the story? Does it enhance it? And why did it happen? And did it end up taking away from the character as a result? Now, the reason this change has happened is to facilitate a very specific plot twist that's going to happen at the end of the film. However, it probably could have done without it, and some elements from John's original origin from the comic could have been brought in and perhaps made this entire story stronger. Also, in the case of this being John and having him so strongly have parts of Kyle's origin, it speaks on a meta level to something that bothers people, the idea that John is derivative, and they feel that by giving him one of the other Lanterns' origins, it's saying that there isn't anything unique about John, that he can't stand, he has to pick up other people's. Whereas in reality, he's quite unique. Others feel that that is too harsh and has mentioned that things can change. Now, the moment of John getting this ring, which is said to be Hal's, was treated as a bit of a bait and switch in the trailer to see the idea that Hal was dead. By the end of this, you may wish he was. He's not. Now, John does not want the ring, but it won't let him remove it. But it does tell him that it can take him to a place where he'll get some information. This is the JL satellite, the Justice League satellite, the Watchtower. When he gets there, he meets the members of the League who are presented in this movie. Aside from Green Arrow, you're not going to see any of them again. The others are Vixen and Martian Manhunter. Vixen appears to be there as a bit of a callback to the DCAU, because of course Vixen's been on Justice League teams, but in this context it feels like remembering remember? John and Vixen dated. There she is. Maybe in future movies, they can date again. It's also important to note that from this point on, roughly 16 minutes in, the intro before this is the only part where we're going to see John by himself. The only moments where he's going to be defined against himself, such as he was in that alley when he went and stepped into that fight. The rest of the time, he's going to be with other people, and a lot of the time, he's not even going to be defined against them. He's just going to be there. The Justice League straight up attacks him. John Jones can read minds. You'd think that maybe he'd give at least a cursory like, huh, he's just confused and wants answers, but no, they fight. The fight is pretty cool, but it also demonstrates one of the problems that occurs in this film a decent amount, which is that you'll see something, then characters will say something else entirely. John is excellent at using his ring. It's really cool, he's got this innate ability. But then Green Arrow says,
Okay, did you see how much he sucked at using it?
is this meant to be a joke or is it obtuse? At first I thought it was a joke, but then later things happen in the same vein that just completely contradicted earlier scenes, so I couldn't be sure anymore. Now after they fight first and ask questions later, we must note that they have also written off the rest of the Justice League members, quite flippantly.
Superman and Wonder Woman should be back within a week. Perhaps they will have answers for us.
It's too bad Batman's pulled one of his disappearing acts.
Note this because it will be particularly relevant with what happens with Hal later. John still wants the ring off, and Ollie wants to know what happened to Hal, and the film does a good job of building up Ollie and Hal's friendship even though Hal isn't there. Just subtle things like how Ollie knows the oath seamlessly. It's a really good moment, and it would have been nice if there were more moments like that of connection but applied to John. But there can't be because he's set up as having an origin. The rest of this movie already feels like it's hit the ground running. So that's another juxtaposition that occurs, is that this movie is meant to be an origin for John, but it doesn't fully feel like one. It feels instead like he should already be a Lantern because of how things are unfolding. Now it's the adventure portion, Ollie and John, and this is the moment that the creators claim harken back to Hard Traveling Heroes. Hard Traveling Heroes was a moment in the 70s wherein Green Lantern got very socially political as a book, and it became a team-up between Green Lantern Hal Jordan and Green Arrow, the two going on adventures across America with staunchly opposing ideas and views. It was meant to be a deep meditation on current issues of the time. It often devolved into things like Ollie wearing a gold Native American costume and punching Hal in the face. So the equivalence here is meant to be John and Ollie teaming up like Green Lantern and Green Arrow. More quotes. John, Jim, and I are big fans of fan service, and we know the fans will go nuts and think of the Hard Traveling Heroes. It should be Ollie. The dynamic that they set up for Ollie and John here is reminiscent of when they really first met in Justice League back in 1974. In the story that opens with a dead Santa, I did an entire review on it. How can you forget the dead Santa story? This is the story where Hal was taken out because he's going to answer the summons and he slips on some soap on the floor and knocks himself out, and so the ring has to go get John. And the dynamic is that Ollie is wary. By the end, they build a mutual respect. I'm bringing this up because in these interviews, it's specifically referencing these things and hoping that viewers will harken back to them. But again, that doesn't match what's being depicted necessarily, unless it's a very loose, like Green Lantern and Green Arrow. It can be anybody. Hard Traveling Heroes, the 90s thought so with Kyle Rayner and Connor. And again, the overt messaging of Hard Traveling Heroes isn't there. Some cuts made were to make this as generic and inoffensive in any way as possible in terms of any kind of social commentary, which is not necessarily the best for John because he comes out a very active character in that regard. Not aggressive, but aware. It is part of who he is. And lots of these moments in this are so subtle that it's not really something that stands out about him. Now, some will think that works better and gives room for other aspects of him, but those are never really filled in. But we're 19 minutes in, and now the movie shifts focus. It's now going to be about the Rann-Thanagarian War. As John and Ollie arrive on Oa and find the Guardians and the court dead. They are then attacked by Hawkgirl, which launches them into this new plot. Now, this section forward is meant to parallel the journey up the river in Apocalypse Now, and visually this is where the movie absolutely shines. The space battles and landscapes, they're beautifully rendered. The thing is, there's not many emotional connections for the viewer, and particularly not with John. John's never met the core, so any emotion would be coming from prior knowledge, or if one's just very sensitive to sudden death scenes. It's more a sense of vague mystery which one may latch onto. The war functions the same way, and it starts to build in this vein. It's interesting from an academic perspective, and the mystery of who truly started the war and are both sides being manipulated is intriguing. But again, this doesn't really have to do with John, and he doesn't react to it over much, nor do his past experiences as a soldier or his trauma truly come into play that much. Which would work better, again, if this wasn't presented as John's origin, so lots more things should be focusing on him. This is where the aspects of Apocalypse Now, where it is more of an outward-looking film than an inner one, are starting to contradict with what the intent of this film is versus staying within the vibe and Apocalypse Now. John's there observing and not overly reacting. Now, in fairness, the writers did say they did have scenes cut, particularly between John and Shiera, and I think that hurt the film, because John and Shiera are clearly meant to parallel each other. She's a warrior who can't see past her feud with the Iranians. They share a perspective, but the lack of conversations between them reduces her to angry warrior woman. And it means that we don't have a reference point for their relationship changing and him softening as he does throughout the film. At the end, when she's clearly into him, it feels like it comes out of nowhere and it's more like a DCAU member berry, whereas in the first draft, it was probably more developed. Now this movie stays on this train of the war plot for a while, and it hits its stride in this point. The center of the film is strong. So you get to see some fun moments with John. He's training, he's getting used to the ring, maybe he wants to keep it after all. Eventually, the crew end up battling the Sinestro Corps, realizing that it is a third party fueling hostilities between Ron and Thanagar. They've also picked up Adam Strange. He was there, so now we have someone from Ron and Thanagar, so we can have some differing perspectives. All of this is seemingly being led by Sinestro. There's a decent battle scene. The fights in this movie are solid. John gets some cool moments with the ring, which he's using against Yellow Corps members, which I'm only noting because of what Ollie says in the next scene when they're captured and in the cell. Ollie states,
The color yellow is the one thing your ring power's useless against.
Yeah, the ring told me. But I've been up against that kind of barrier my whole life. It hasn't stopped me yet.
Now this line is meant to be a social commentary on the biases that John has experienced because of his race. But this line is actually one of John Semper's favorites in the film. However, as he states, it was modified. I have a quote again. One of my favorite lines that I wrote is when they explain to him that the color yellow can be used against him, or he's powerless against the color yellow. The original line is, I've been up against a color barrier my whole life and I haven't let it stop me. And they changed it just a bit to, I've been up against that kind of barrier. And that's okay, is it? Because it's the same meaning. I love that line. That line is for me. Again, that's one of those milestone lines that sometimes as writers you fall in love with lines and you fall in love with moments. I'm glad he likes the line and doesn't feel it's overly changed. I do feel that removing some of that does change the line and rob it of some of the power that it could have had, and also again takes away from the hard traveling heroes vibe that they were trying to go for a little bit. But there is a more important reason why this line doesn't work. It's because in the prior scene we saw John going up against Yellow, no problem. The problems that were occurring was because he wasn't as experienced, because lots of the Sinestro Corps have abilities. The one moment where he's held in place, that appears to be more because it's a mental hold and not necessarily because it's the color yellow. It's not really explicit. The scene doesn't play out as if the ring has a yellow weakness. It doesn't come across that way anyway. So because of this, it doesn't fully land, neither the line or the scene, because if it was a yellow weakness, it didn't come across that way, and if it wasn't, then it's just an error. If you've read comics with yellow weakness, you know the yellow weakness just puts you down. You can't do anything. Now it's in this cell roughly 50 minutes in that we're introduced to Hal Jordan. So now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. The thing that really brings this film down for John is not necessarily the inclusion of Hal Jordan, but the execution of that inclusion. It's not the fact that Hal's a villain, although that's oddly executed as well. I actually like villain Hal. Parallax reboot, boo. The start of these issues occurred before Hal arrived. This is because from the start, this film takes a route that the comics never did, which was seemingly pitting Hal and John against each other. There are little things that people can point to, such as the fact that John literally has Hal's ring rather than his own. This inside the narrative itself, making it feel antagonistic kind of on a meta level. This idea of, oh, is Hal that great? Now of course these discussions happen in fandom all the time, and in the right circles they can be a lot of fun. Who's your favorite character? Who's your favorite lantern? Hal trips on soap. That's however very different than when the work itself feels like there's some kind of antagonism built in, or at least some kind of snarking happening. And the worst part is that in this movie it didn't have to, and for a time looks like it isn't going to. Like the scenes shown at the start were misdirects, and maybe they were just being a bit too enthusiastic about Hal. Because at the start this movie appears to be aggressively filleting Hal, riding him harder than Guy Gardner's fiance.
Hal Jordan is acknowledged to be the greatest Green Lantern in the universe.
In the universe?
But it quickly becomes clear that that's not what's going on. Instead, what's happening is twofold. For one thing, John is being used to be a mouthpiece for certain members of the audience.
Look, it's not like I haven't heard of Hal Jordan. And yeah, he's pretty great, but so are all these other lanterns, right?
That line doesn't really work for John because he doesn't know Hal Jordan. He knows of Green Lantern, but he doesn't know anything about Hal specifically, and what does he know about his exploits? This line doesn't really work. It's clearly more of a meta line that's been inserted and given to him. Also, the other thing that's meant to be happening in that scene is that Hal is the villain. The foreshadowing is odd.
Sinestro. He trained Hal into becoming the greatest Green Lantern ever.
What happened to him?
He turned into an evil psycho. But again, He trained Hal.
Remember, if your teacher is evil, you will be too. Sinestro taught him. Now, it's because of this that some feel that the goal of this film was character assassination, to just put Hal down, take him down a peg. I don't know if that was the case. I can see how it could be read that way. I don't know what was in the writers and creators' hearts. It was mentioned in one of the interviews that when they were approached, they were asked to maybe do something a bit different. So perhaps that was the intent of this, just taking it in a different direction. And villain Hal isn't something you see all that often. Benefit of the doubt. The thing is, in this film, both could have shone, as they did in his initial comic book appearance. John Stewart first debuted in Green Lantern in Green Lantern 87. He was appointed as a replacement by the Guardians after Guy Gardner was taken out of commission by a school bus while saving a child. They decided they needed more than one backup. John is first seen telling some clearly biased cops to step off him and his friend. Hal, coming in at the tail end of this, gets the wrong impression that John is just someone with a chip on his shoulder, but he trusts the Guardians. So him and John have a conversation. At this point, John was characterized as an out-of-work architect because it was implied that biases were stopping him getting jobs. The two have different methods, but one isn't presented as better than the other. Instead, they learn from each other, and by the end of it, they have a mutual respect. They end on good footing, and you see that they have different approaches, but that they both work, and that they're both valid. It's a really awesome moment where you end up with a story about two cool lanterns, and it feels like the mythos is expanding, not that they're being pitted against each other, more like, oh, now there's more cool lanterns to read about. And as mentioned, John has some cool moments, like instantly deciding that he's not gonna have a secret identity because he's got nothing to hide. It instantly sets him up as different. You kind of want to know more. They almost have something similar going on here, where they were going to start off not exactly pitted against each other, but it quickly goes away. But here's the start.
They screwed up big time by choosing me as your replacement.
Oh, the Guardians don't make mistakes when it comes to appointing a Green Lantern.
So wholesome, it could have been so nice, but no, we're doing Emerald Twilight. This was the plot wherein Hal became the villain Parallax, which he did sorta in this film. It's kind of a fusion of the original story and the reboot. There are a couple of things about this. One, it pulls focus from the war plot, because now we're really focused on Hal and him being just a Saturday morning cartoon level villain. He is out to destroy the universe, and he's meant to be our Kurtz. But he has no real motivation. It's very cookie cutter. Just, I'm gonna raise the galaxy and remake it in my image because I'm a god now. What happened? He was captured by Sinestro, and Sinestro forced the Parallax symbiote down his throat while he was naked. Just cuz. And it opened his eyes. Now he sees things differently. He needs to destroy the universe for reasons. They do recreate that great Green Lantern cover with Hal just holding all the rings, but it's sadly not as cool here in the movie. They also don't give him a really scary or awesome Parallax design when he transforms. Come on, go for it. Rows of teeth. This movie already is not for kids anyway, just give me the teeth. So Hal has taken over the Sinestro Corps, and Sinestro was already instigating a war between Rand and Thanagar, which he was doing because he loves chaos. And now he's looking to get his hands on Sardast's doomsday weapon. Yes, there's a whole bunch of Adam Strange stuff that is just introduced about 2/3 through the movie. Adam Strange just mentions, oh, my wife Alana is dead, my daughter is missing, and all of this, and you're meant to care, and it just comes out of nowhere and smacks you in the face. It's about the same time as they mention the metagene, because metagenes are going to matter in the finale. That happens a lot in this film. These details are suddenly just dropped upon you. Now, the inclusion of Parallax at all was divisive for some fans, because there are some who really dislike this arc in the Hal Jordan story and feel that it should never have happened. However, in the comics, whether one liked it or not, it was built up to. Hal had gray hair streaks, he was getting older, he was already struggling, and then Coast City was destroyed, his family killed, and he snapped. He tried to use his ring to bring them back, but was told that wasn't what it was for, and he broke. Basically thinking, what good was all this power? Why did it get him? And he just went berserk, killing the Corps, the Guardians, snapping Sinestro's neck, Hal neck snapped Jordan, and becoming the villain Parallax. Ganthet fled, taking the last Green Lantern ring, or seemingly the last one, and gave it to Kyle Rayner before vanishing. This setting Kyle up as the last Green Lantern, and also setting up his eventual conflict with Hal. It's doing this plot, which is why John has Kyle's origin, because it's the simplest way to kind of get to this place. So to make Hal's Emerald Twilight plot elements work, John's origin was sacrificed. Now, the Parallax reboot, which introduces the whole symbiote that they introduced in this film as well, was as follows. Hal was eventually brought back to life. He died and been the Spectre, but to bring him back to life, you had to absolve him of all that death. So what to do? He was possessed. That means it wasn't his fault. It made him do things he would never have done. Now, look, other people are possessed by Parallax. Stop thinking about it. Still better than a cocoon under the ocean. So I actually do like what they did here, the idea that Parallax awakened some kind of innate dissatisfaction inside of him that was there already. The thing is, this movie wasn't about Hal, and you haven't seen Hal, so this doesn't really work because it's just pulling from all these external sources you're supposed to have feelings from, be they positive or negative. You don't have a baseline for Hal in this movie. You just hear what other people have said about him. John also has no reason to care outside of the generic destroying the universe is bad.
Make the choice and join me in making a new and better galaxy.
My only choice is to stop you or die trying.
They try and draw parallels between Hal killing and John not wanting to, but it's not even seeing Hal kill that changes John's mind. He had already changed it before meeting him.
No. I've had enough killing.
They try a bunch of things here, like Hal says to John that join him and they can rule the galaxy together. But why would he do that? He killed all the other lanterns and he wants all the rings. Why not just kill John and get his own ring back? The climax of the movie, most logic, especially around Hal and John, just flies right out the window. The sequence may land better if one is not only not a fan of Hal, but bears some negative feelings towards him, and it may cover some of the weaknesses of the climax. This for some, others may enjoy it regardless. Speaking of John having moments, there is one early in the film where he says the oath and makes fun of it, and some are saying that's him belittling the Green Lantern mythos, but that actually happened in his first appearance. He thought the oath was lame, but it grew on him, and they kind of recreate that here, so he says it again powerfully later, and it works. It's in this climax in the last 15-ish minutes of the film that John wears the Green Lantern costume without the coat on, so it's only here that he fully embraces the whole Green Lantern look and feel. Another thing that's interesting surrounding John in this movie is that he doesn't get to have the big heroic moments or be the character to make any of the sacrifices. He's not really confronted with anything except for his own issues, but all of the big core plot elements are resolved by other people, or the things that he does have a hand in, he does in a kind of ancillary, tertiary, less direct kind of way. He kills Nestor by accident when the ring flies through him as he summons it and says he has no choice, but we earlier saw him summon the ring and it dodged past people and obstacles at points, so is that the case? The ring before this had always forbidden John from using lethal force, so why would it do it itself to get to him? It could have been a really intriguing contrast of Hal's cold-blooded shoot you in the back killing versus John killing because he had to, and it would have worked nicely with him reconciling his past. Instead, it's treated very much as it was an accident, so it's fine.
Damn you. You gave me no choice.
John also doesn't kill Hal. Yes, Nestor and Hal die in this movie. John isn't the one to do it, Ollie is, because Ollie's the one with the connection to Hal. It's Ollie who runs up and goes, "Hal, you're not yourself, this isn't you." Which brings up a point that they don't fully address, just how possessed is he? Is this not really him? Is he being controlled by another entity? Because then there should be at least a slight moral quandary about killing him. Just a tiny one, a smidge, but no, I'm not gonna think about it. John also isn't the person to stop the destruction being wrought by the out-of-control Zeta beam. Instead, Adam Strange sacrifices himself using the beam's ability to lock onto his newly mentioned metagene to force it to explode on him. So while John has some cool moments, and you definitely don't want him to die in this movie, he also isn't the person who resolves things in a really heroic manner for the overall plot. Because of this, he ends up feeling like an accessory in his own origin, because so many things don't tie to him and he doesn't factor into certain key elements that are going on or influence them over much. It leaves you with a film that feels that it wouldn't have been significantly different if the Lantern involved had been Kyle, or Guy, or Simon, or Jessica, or that even in the case of, say, the latter two, that it would have been more interesting if it were. Imagine Jessica's anxieties and fears in a plot like this. The end of the film was also very tonally dissonant from the rest.
I had to kill my best friend. I don't know how I'm supposed to live with that.
We can't beat ourselves up over it. As long as we do them for the right reasons.
A few moments later.
I'm starving. Let's get something to eat.
It's just the end of the Avengers now.
Oh no! Anyway.
He sets out to rebuild the core, sending the rings off, and him and Shayera have a moment. The end. Sequel bait! This movie is okay, but the pacing feels very off, and it feels like several ideas cobbled together rather than the seamless journey ending this crescendo of John overcoming because to escape the jungle, you must return to the jungle. The cuts feel as though they were extensive. This film was cobbled down to fit a more child-friendly runtime, although it's still 85 minutes. But it feels like it was meant to be significantly longer, and that it would have potentially worked better if more bits had been left in. As it stands, this doesn't feel like it's much of a vehicle for John to shine, although again, Miles will vary. It feels more like a movie several movies into a series where you already know everyone, so you can focus on other elements because everyone's already established. The decision to include Hal how they did, it's off for several reasons. What's going on with Hal becomes a central climax plot point. As a result, you've already set up a scenario for Hal to pull focus in John's movie. Also, Hal didn't need to be there. They could have written him out the same way they did everyone else. Or he could have gotten injured. He tripped on a pebble. He's in a coma for the whole movie. The end. The amount of dead characters in this, in my opinion, is a waste opportunity for a lot of stories. stories, you could see John interact with some of these Corps members. Hopefully some of them will be retconned to being alive and just not joining the Corps yet. Cat Matui re-riot. Now, even in the structure presented, I think you could have made this work a lot better and kept evil Hal. Let's start, let's do it. Let's go into a world of pure imagination. Back to the beginning. The first thing, start off the story with John already a backup lantern. His backstory can stay the same, only he's already on standby, and maybe his wartime experiences left him feeling conflicted about this. So he already has a ring when suddenly Hal's ring shows up at his place. This way you bypass the origin aspect. You can start off already in progress, which will match better with the rest of the pacing of the story as it stands. Now we can do a brief flashback when he sees Hal's ring, just something very short. Show him meeting Hal, make it an updated version of their original meeting. It's professional, not overly close, but John feels a sense of duty about it, which is a key part of John's character. This would also line up with what we saw earlier of him having that fight in the alley. John just can't stand for there to be any injustice, and he feels that something bad must have happened to Hal. Also, this establishes some form of connection between John and Hal, which means when they eventually meet later on and end up fighting, there'll be more there. Now you can have the same structure. He goes to the satellite to get info. They don't fight him because they're professionals and also they know of him. You can still write off the other characters the way they did. The comics do that all the time. Batman won't take our calls. Now him and Ollie can still have the same dynamic and they can set off and look for Hal. We can still follow the rest of the plot line and attempt the Apocalypse Now parallels. Very little has to change, but hopefully John can get a bit more time. Maybe cut Adam Strange, but keep Shayera so that we can focus on building John's relationship. Now the mystery element can thicken. Now in the climax, don't kill people. This means you can use them again later on. And we can ramp up the question of how possessed is Hal. And now because of this history that's been introduced in our version, John's reluctance to kill him will have a more grounded place in the story outside of just being tropey.
But killing you isn't the way.
To cement Hal's turn to the dark side, we can somehow wibbly wobbly ring magic-y have his ring be what destroys the Zeta Beam, but also in the destruction of his ring, it signals the end of his time as a Green Lantern. And then you can set them up to fight another day with John rebuilding the Corps and Hal setting out there to raise the universe, although hopefully we'll give him a better motivation of what he's doing. Let's make it so that Hal's trying to sow fear into the universe. Let's just give him what the Parallax Symbiote did. But that's just my rewrite. In my opinion, that would make this overall a stronger film. It would still pull more focus from John than I would like, but it works with what's there because my idea is to work with what's there, not just completely gut it and rewrite it entirely. I mean, if you wanted to gut it but keep Apocalypse Now, what would work far better would be a Hal and Sinestro narrative ending on Quard. Overall, I'm curious about what lasting impression this film will leave, whether I'll remember having watched it in 5 years, that kind of thing. As it stands, this movie is average. It has some good fights, a decent mystery, but also at times contradicts itself. It doesn't have its themes fully supported by the actions in the film itself. It pulls from external sources for material and to elicit reactions, but doesn't fully commit to or co-opt them in a meaningful way. It places John in a position where instead of feeling like a strong lantern in his own right, it can be read as if he's the best because Hal is evil, which does him a disservice. It's competent, but it's also clearly been tampered with, suffering the forces of having to adhere to a children's runtime and format, despite the fact that it doesn't present itself as an all-ages child-friendly film. John's a super cool lantern and I was glad to see him get his own movie, but in my opinion it could have been stronger. But I want to hear from you. Those are just my thoughts and I want to hear yours down below. What did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you ambivalent about it? Just hearing about it now. Do you feel it executed fantastically? This is better than Apocalypse Now. Do you like my changes? What would you have done? Do you wish there was no Hal? Tell me things down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.